Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step back. The guard voice was sharp, dismissive, the kind of tone reserved for problems that needed to disappear quickly. This ceremony is for military personnel and authorized family members only. Sarah Mitchell didn't move. She stood at the security checkpoint, her simple gray dress slightly wrinkled from the 3-hour drive, her hands clutching a worn leather purse. At 52, her face showed the lines of a life lived with purpose, but to the young guard, she was just another civilian who'd wandered where she didn't belong. "I'm authorized family," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the growing crowd of onlookers. "I'm here for my son, Captain James Mitchell. He's receiving the Silver Star today." The second guard, younger and more impatient, stepped forward with a tablet. "Name's not on the list. No clearance, no entry." Pretty simple. What they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was the weight of history standing before them. Because Sarah Mitchell wasn't just a mother. She was a soldier, and this wasn't her first ceremony. The main gate of Fort Bragg stood imposing in the morning sun, its flags snapping in the Carolina breeze. Behind the checkpoint, hundreds of service members and families were already gathering on the parade ground for the award ceremony. The air buzzed with anticipation. This was one of the Army's highest honors, and the families of the recipients had traveled from across the country. Sarah could see the reviewing stand in the distance. She could see the rows of soldiers in their dress uniforms. Somewhere in that sea of green and gold was James, her son, waiting for a moment he'd earned in the burning sands of Afghanistan. "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again." The first guard, whose name tag read Jennings, placed a hand firmly on Sarah's shoulder. "You need to leave this area immediately." "I have my ID right here," Sarah said, reaching slowly into her purse. She pulled out her driver's license, her son's deployment information, and the official invitation letter that had arrived 2 weeks ago. "Everything you need is—" Jennings barely glanced at the papers. "These aren't military credentials. You're not in the system. That means you're not cleared." End of story. A small crowd had begun to form. Other families waiting to pass through security were watching with a mixture of curiosity and pity. One woman whispered to her husband, "Poor thing, probably got the wrong date." Sarah felt the familiar weight of being underestimated. It was a feeling she knew well, had known since the first day she'd stepped into a recruiting office at 18, when the sergeant had looked her up and down and asked if she was sure she could handle it. But here's what they missed. Corporal Davis, the second guard, was scrolling through his tablet with growing frustration. "Look, lady, I don't care what papers you have. The system is the system. No digital clearance, no entry. Now are you going to leave? Or do we need to make this official?" The threat hung in the air. Official meant handcuffs, meant humiliation, meant missing her son's moment. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Call your commanding officer." "Excuse me?" Jennings scoffed. "Your commanding officer. Get them on the radio right now." The guards exchanged looks. This wasn't how civilians usually acted. Most people, when confronted with military authority, backed down immediately. But there was something in Sarah's posture, in the steel in her voice, that gave them pause. "You're really going to make this difficult?" Davis said, reaching for his radio. "Fine. We'll get the duty officer down here to escort you off the property." What happened next would change everything. Standing about 30 yards away, watching the entire confrontation, was Colonel Patricia Hernandez. She was the deputy commander of the base, a 30-year veteran with 4 combat deployments under her belt. She'd been walking from her car to the ceremony when the raised voices caught her attention. At first, she'd assumed it was a standard security issue. Wrong gate, wrong time, someone trying to sneak in. But something about the woman's bearing, the way she held herself despite being cornered, made Hernandez stop and watch. She saw the gray dress. She saw the worn purse. She saw the shoulders held back in a posture that was unmistakably military, even without the uniform. And then she saw the woman's face and profile. Colonel Hernandez's blood ran cold. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and pulled up a photo from 20 years ago. A grainy image from a ceremony in Kosovo. 3 soldiers standing at attention, medals gleaming on their chests. And there, in the center, was a younger version of the woman currently being harassed at the gate. "Oh my God," Hernandez breathed. She started running. And that's when everything changed. The duty officer was arriving at the gate, a stern-faced lieutenant with a clipboard and a no-nonsense attitude. "What's the situation here?" "Unauthorized civilian refusing to leave, sir," Jennings reported crisply. "No clearance in the system. We're ready to." "Halt!" The command cut through the morning air like a whip crack. Every head turned. Colonel Hernandez was sprinting across the parking lot, her dress uniform jacket flapping, her face a mask of urgent fury. She reached the checkpoint in seconds, breathing hard, and immediately positioned herself between Sarah and the guards. Her eyes swept over Sarah's face, confirming what she already knew, and then she turned to face the security detail. "Stand down," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "All of you, stand down right now." The lieutenant blinked in confusion. "Ma'am, this civilian is—" "This civilian," Colonel Hernandez said, her voice rising with barely contained rage, "is Sergeant Major Sarah Mitchell, United States Army, retired. She holds the Bronze Star with Valor, 2 Purple Hearts, and Combat Action Badge. She served 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. She was a helicopter crew chief who flew over 300 combat missions." The color drained from every guard's face. Hernandez wasn't finished. She turned to Sarah, and in full view of everyone, brought her hand up in the sharpest, most respectful salute of her career. "Sergeant Major Mitchell," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It is an honor." Sarah, after a long moment, returned the salute. It was crisp, perfect, the muscle memory of decades of service. The silence that followed was deafening. The duty lieutenant looked like he might be sick. Jennings and Davis had gone white as sheets, their previous arrogance evaporating like morning mist. Colonel Hernandez slowly lowered her salute, but kept her attention fixed on Sarah. "Ma'am, I apologize on behalf of this entire command for how you've been treated. These soldiers made a critical error in judgment." She turned back to the guards, her expression now one of controlled fury. "Let me tell you who you just threatened to arrest," she said, her voice carrying across the checkpoint. A larger crowd had gathered now, drawn by the commotion. Officers, enlisted personnel, and families all pressed closer to hear. Sergeant Major Mitchell isn't just here as a mother today. She's here as one of the most decorated aviators in Army history. In 2003, during the initial invasion of Iraq, her Black Hawk was hit by an RPG. The pilot was killed, the co-pilot severely wounded. She took control of that bird with no formal flight training, crash-landed it in hostile territory, and then single-handedly defended the crew until rescue arrived. 7 hours under fire. 7 hours. Gasps rippled through the crowd. But the story gets even more incredible. Hernandez continued, her voice steady but passionate. In 2007, her convoy was ambushed outside Fallujah. Her vehicle was destroyed. Rather than wait for backup, she grabbed a radio and coordinated close air support, personally directing Apache helicopters to neutralize the threat while treating 3 wounded soldiers. She saved 17 lives that day. She took a step closer to the now trembling guards. And in 2011, during her final deployment to Afghanistan, she volunteered to go on a rescue mission to extract a surrounded platoon. Her helicopter took heavy fire. Both pilots were hit. She took the controls again, flew through a sandstorm with 0 visibility, landed in a hot LZ, and evacuated 23 wounded soldiers. That's when she earned her second Purple Heart. Shrapnel from a mortar round pierced her shoulder, and she kept flying for another 40 minutes. The silence was absolute now. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Sarah stood quietly through the entire recitation, her expression neutral, as if she were listening to someone else's story. But her hands were trembling slightly. "The soldier receiving the Silver Star today," Hernandez said, looking at Sarah with profound respect, "Captain James Mitchell, learned everything he knows about courage and service from his mother. Because she was there. She showed him what it meant to serve. And you," she turned her blazing gaze back to the guards, "you looked at this hero and saw nothing but a nuisance." The duty lieutenant stepped forward, his face ashen. Sergeant Major, there are no words. I apologize. Jennings and Davis couldn't even meet Sarah's eyes. They stood at rigid attention, looking like they wished the ground would swallow them whole. But then Sarah did something that shocked everyone. She smiled. It was small, tired, but genuine. At ease, all of you, she said quietly. Her voice had changed. No longer the defensive tone of a mother being turned away, but the calm, authoritative tone of a senior non-commissioned officer. You were doing your jobs. The system failed, not you. Colonel Hernandez shook her head. Ma'am, with all respect, that's too generous. These soldiers, Sarah interrupted gently, were following protocol. They saw someone who didn't fit the expected image, and they reacted accordingly. It's a teaching moment, not a court-martial moment. She looked at Jennings and Davis directly. Both young men were barely in their 20s, probably on their first duty assignment. Let me ask you both something, Sarah said. What did you see when you looked at me? Jennings swallowed hard. Mom, I saw a civilian, an older woman, someone who looked lost. Exactly, Sarah said. You saw what I looked like, not who I am. That's the lesson here. In this job, in this life, you're going to meet people who don't look the part, who don't fit your expectations. Some of the greatest warriors I've ever served with were grandmothers, skinny kids who looked like they couldn't do a push-up, people who looked soft until the bullets started flying. She paused, letting the words sink in. Courage doesn't have a uniform. Sacrifice doesn't have a dress code. And heroes. She looked at Colonel Hernandez, then back at the guards. Heroes are everywhere, if you're wise enough to recognize them. And then came the moment no one expected. From behind the checkpoint, a figure in dress uniform was approaching rapidly. The crowd parted instinctively. It was Captain James Mitchell, Sarah's son. He'd heard the commotion and left the ceremony staging area against protocol to see what was happening. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with his mother's determined jaw and his father's green eyes. His uniform was immaculate, the new silver star gleaming on his chest. They'd done a private presentation earlier, so he could wear it for the ceremony. Mom, he called out, confusion and concern in his voice. Then he saw the guards, saw Colonel Hernandez's defensive posture, and his expression darkened. What's going on here? Your mother was being denied entry, Hernandez said carefully. There was a misunderstanding. James's jaw clenched. He looked at the guards, then at his mother, and in that instant, everyone could see the family resemblance, not just physical, but in the quiet intensity, the controlled power. Denied entry, he repeated slowly. You denied entry to the woman who taught me what honor means, who showed me what service looks like, who spent 22 years defending this country. James, Sarah said quietly. It's handled. But James wasn't finished. He stepped closer to his mother, and his voice, trained to carry commands across a battlefield, rang out clear and strong. Let me tell you about my mother, he said, and though he was looking at the guards, his words were for everyone. When I was 8 years old, she deployed to Iraq. I didn't understand why she had to go. I just knew other kids' parents got to stay home. But she sat me down and explained that some people needed her help. That being a soldier meant standing between danger and the people who couldn't defend themselves. His voice grew thick with emotion. When I was 12, she came home from Afghanistan with a Purple Heart. She never told us how she got it. I found out years later from one of her crew members. She'd taken shrapnel protecting her co-pilot, threw herself over him when the mortar hit. Save his life. Sarah's eyes were glistening now, but she didn't interrupt. And when I told her I wanted to join the army, James continued. Do you know what she said? She didn't try to talk me out of it. She didn't tell me war stories to scare me. She looked me in the eye and said, if you're going to serve, serve with everything you have. Take care of your soldiers. Bring them all home. That's what she did. That's what she taught me. And that, he pointed at the silver star on his chest, I earned because of her. Because she showed me how. The ceremony had officially started in the background. The national anthem was playing, but no one at the gate was moving. This moment, unplanned and raw, was more powerful than any official program. Ceremony delayed by 15 minutes. Non negociable. We have a situation that requires immediate resolution. There's sputtering on the other end. protests about the schedule, about the visiting dignitaries. Hernandez cut through it all. Delayed. 15 minutes. That's an order. She turned to Sarah. Sergeant Major, would you walk with me? There's someone who needs to meet you before this ceremony begins. Sarah looked confused. Colonel, I just want to see my son receive his medal. I don't need any special. Ma'am, Hernandez said gently. With all due respect, this isn't optional. Please, trust me. They walked together across the parade ground, James on one side of his mother, Hernandez on the other. The guards and the lieutenant followed at a respectful distance, still processing what had happened. What happened next left everyone speechless. Hernandez led them to a small VIP tent set up near the reviewing stand. Inside, adjusting his dress uniform, was General Marcus Thompson, the three-star general who would be presiding over the ceremony. He was a legend in the Army, 58 years old, with a career spanning 3 decades and some of the most critical operations in recent history. Sir, Hernandez said, entering the tent, there's someone you need to meet. The general looked up, slightly annoyed at the interruption. Then his eyes landed on Sarah, and his expression changed entirely. He went very still. Mitchell, he said quietly, disbelief in his voice. Sarah Mitchell. Sarah stared at him, recognition dawning slowly. Marcus? Marcus Thompson. Oh my God, the general breathed. He crossed the tent in 3 strides and, shocking everyone present, pulled Sarah into a tight embrace. I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth. After you retired, we lost track. I tried to find you, but I went quiet, Sarah said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Needed to. After everything. They separated, and the general held her at arm's length, looking her over with the critical eye of an old friend. You look good. Older but good. You too, Sarah said with a small smile. 3 stars now. I knew you'd make it. Hernandez and James exchanged confused looks. The general saw their expressions and laughed. A genuine, joyful sound. You want to know how I know Sergeant Major Mitchell? He said. She saved my life. Twice. General Thompson gestured for everyone to sit. The ceremony could wait. This was more important. It was 2004, he said, his voice taking on the distant quality of someone revisiting a painful memory. I was a captain then, leading a company in Ramadi. Worst fighting of the war. We'd been in sustained combat for 3 days straight. Our position was being overrun. We called for air support, for extraction, for anything. Nothing was available. We were written off. He looked at Sarah. Then we heard the rotors. Sarah said nothing, but James leaned forward, riveted. One helicopter, the general continued. A single Black Hawk flying through a sandstorm, through active anti-aircraft fire, through conditions that grounded every other bird in the theater. The pilot was Sergeant Major Mitchell. She set that bird down in the middle of hell itself, loaded up my entire command, 37 soldiers, made 3 trips under fire, and got us all out. He paused, his voice rough with emotion. The last trip, her bird took an RPG. Should have gone down. She kept it flying through pure force of will. Landed it at base on 1 engine and a prayer. When they pulled the maintenance reports afterward, engineers said the helicopter should have been mechanically impossible to fly. But she did it. James was staring at his mother, seeing her in a completely new light. Sarah just shook her head. I was doing my job, she said quietly. Your job, General Thompson said firmly, was crew chief. Your job was maintaining the bird, managing the weapons systems. Your job was not flying into impossible situations to save soldiers everyone else had written off. But you did it anyway, because that's who you are. He turned to the others in the tent. The second time she saved my life was different. I was a colonel then, 2010, Afghanistan. IED took out my convoy. I was trapped in a burning vehicle, unconscious. My security detail was trying to extract me, but the fire was too intense. Then Sergeant Major Mitchell, she was just passing through the area on a supply run. She saw the smoke, stopped her convoy, ran into the flames, and pulled me out. Took second-degree burns on her hands and arms doing it. He held up his hands, showing faint scars. These are from where she grabbed me. She burned herself dragging me to safety. Spent 3 months in recovery. never complained once. The ceremony couldn't start without this being made right. General Thompson's expression shifted from nostalgic to thunderous. "Now tell me," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, "why was Sergeant Major Mitchell being denied entry to this ceremony?" Colonel Hernandez explained the situation at the gate. With each sentence, the general's face grew darker. When she finished, he stood up and walked to the tent entrance. He grabbed his radio and spoke in a tone that made everyone in the tent straighten instinctively. "This is General Thompson. I want the head of base security, the provost marshal, and the commander of the gate detail in my office immediately following the ceremony. We're going to have a conversation about respect, protocol, and how to recognize a goddamn hero when one is standing in front of you." He turned back to Sarah. "Ma'am, I'm making an executive decision. You're not watching this ceremony from the stands. You're presenting your son's medal." Sarah's eyes widened. "Marcus, I can't. That's not protocol. I'm the commanding general," he said with a slight smile. "I can do whatever I want. And what I want is for Captain Mitchell to receive his Silver Star from someone who actually understands what it means. Someone who lived it. Someone who exemplifies everything we're supposedly honoring today." He looked at James. "Captain, any objections?" James's voice was thick with emotion. "No, sir. No objections at all." 15 minutes later, the ceremony began, but not as planned. General Thompson took the microphone. 500 soldiers stood at attention. Families filled the stands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "before we proceed, I need to tell you about someone who embodies the values we honor today." Sarah walked onto the parade ground in her gray dress, still clutching her worn purse. But her bearing, her unmistakable military posture, made every soldier take notice. "This is Sergeant Major Sarah Mitchell, retired," General Thompson announced. 22 years of service. 3 combat tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. Bronze Star with Valor. 2 Purple Hearts. Over 300 combat flight hours. He paused. "This morning, she was stopped at our gate. Questioned. Threatened with arrest. Why? Because she looked like a mother, not a soldier. Because we failed to see the hero standing before us." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Captain James Mitchell learned everything about service from his mother. As did I. She taught me what it means to never leave a soldier behind. He turned to Sarah. "Sergeant Major, present your son's medal. Show these soldiers what a real hero looks like." And what happened next brought tears to everyone watching. Sarah walked to center ground. The sergeant major handed her the blue velvet box containing the Silver Star. James marched forward and saluted his mother. They looked at each other. A lifetime of deployments, missed birthdays, and sacrifice passed between them. Sarah opened the box. The Silver Star gleamed. "Captain Mitchell," she said steadily, "it is my honor to present you with the Silver Star for gallantry in action." She pinned the medal to his chest. "You make me proud every day," she whispered. "Not because of this medal, but because of who you are." James's composure cracked. Tears ran down his face. "I had the best teacher," he whispered back. Sarah stepped back and saluted her son. He returned it. The entire parade ground erupted in thunderous applause. After the ceremony, the young guards approached Sarah at attention. "Sergeant Major," Jennings whispered, "we need to apologize." "What did you learn today?" Sarah asked. "That we can't judge people by appearances. That heroes don't always look the way we expect." "That's a start," Sarah said. "But here's the deeper lesson. Your mistake wasn't checking the list. It was how you treated someone who didn't fit your expectations. You were dismissive, rude." She softened slightly. "How you treat people matters. Your authority is a responsibility, not a weapon. Use it wisely. How do we make sure we never make this mistake again?" Davis asked. "Remember this feeling, this shame. Let it teach you. Every time you see someone who doesn't fit the mold, remember you don't know their story. Show respect. Give people the benefit of the doubt. But the story doesn't end there." General Thompson made good on his promise. New protocols were drafted. Every gate guard would undergo training about recognizing veterans and treating everyone with respect. The incident became a teaching case, the Sarah Mitchell moment, a reminder that heroes walk among us, often unseen. 6 months later, the Army wanted to interview Sarah for a documentary. She declined. "I didn't serve for recognition," she wrote. "I served because it needed to be done." But 3 times a year, Sarah began speaking at basic training graduations. "You won't always be recognized," she would tell recruits. "But that's not why we serve. We serve because someone needs us. Someone is counting on us. And we refuse to let them down." And in the back of every graduation stood her son, Captain, then Major, then Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, building his own legacy. 5 years later, Sergeant Jennings was a drill instructor at Fort Benning. A new recruit asked why he'd become an instructor. "I met a hero once," he said. "I didn't recognize her. I treated her poorly. And she taught me the most important lesson about service. Heroes don't always look the way you think. Sometimes they show up in a gray dress, just trying to see their kid receive an award. If you're smart, you'll recognize them not by what they look like, but by how they carry themselves." That was Sarah Mitchell's true legacy. Not the medals or combat hours. It was the ripple effect of respect, of seeing people for who they truly are, of understanding that heroism wears many faces, and sometimes the most important ones are the ones we walk right past, unless we're wise enough to stop and look.